Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live today. I'm so glad to see so many of you with us from all over the world. I see viewers really from all over. Olivia from Denmark, Rod from Canada, Kelly from Oklahoma City. Let's see, we have Allison from Scotland. Julian from the Netherlands. So thank you to all of you in the audience joining us today. We have a great session for you today. We're very, very excited about it. So thank you for tuning in, taking a little time out of your day to do some genealogy, hear from experts, and just learn from these wonderful Facebook Live sessions. So we're so glad to see you all with us in the audience. Before we get started, I'm just going to let you know about a couple of things that we have going on at MyHeritage. As you know, things are always very busy at MyHeritage with new features coming out every day, all the time, new things to tell you about. So this week, we have a couple things going on. One of them is that for a limited time, we are allowing users who upload their DNA kits from other services that if you've taken a DNA test with Ancestry, with 23andMe, you can take that DNA and upload it to MyHeritage. And normally there is an unlock fee that you have to pay in order to unlock advanced DNA features on MyHeritage. So for now, until the 7th of March, we are waiving that unlock fee. So it is a great opportunity, a great chance for you all to upload DNA kits if you've taken with other services to MyHeritage and get access to all of our advanced DNA features for free. A great opportunity. And as we all know, the more, the more places you upload your DNA kit to, the better it is for you. You can get matches with users from all the different services. As we like to say, it's fishing in all of the ponds. That's how we describe it here at MyHeritage. So we'll be putting a link in the comments section to this limited time offer. We extended it. It was just until the beginning of the week, and we have now extended it until the 7th. So a little bit of time left. So gather those DNA kits from other services if you have or if your family members have, and make sure to upload them to MyHeritage. The second thing I wanted to tell you about is a new feature that we recently released on MyHeritage called Deep Nostalgia. This is a very exciting feature that takes your old family photos, enhances a face within the photo that is detected, and then animates the faces in the photo. So ever since we released this feature at the end of last week, it has just gone viral. We see users from all over the world uploading examples of photos that they have animated using Deep Nostalgia, and the results are just breathtaking. It's amazing for our users to be able to see how their ancestors moved a little, how they winked, how their faces moved. It's really incredible, especially if you weren't able to meet your ancestor, somebody that you have a picture of, but you may have not known them in person. So it's really an incredible feature. It has brought a lot of users to tears, being able to interact with their ancestors on a level that they haven't been up until now. So we'll be putting a link to that feature also in the comment section. It's called Deep Nostalgia, a very, very exciting feature, and we hope that you will all check it out. In addition, before we get to today's session, I just want to let you know that we will be giving away a MyHeritage DNA kit to one lucky winner today at the end of today's show. So in order to enter, all that you have to do is just tell us about something that you've discovered using MyHeritage DNA, leave a comment in the comment section or a question for our guest, and that will enter you into today's competition, and one lucky winner will win a MyHeritage DNA kit. If you've already taken a MyHeritage DNA kit, you can give it to a family member or a friend. It's always great to have all your family members test as well. So please leave those comments in the comments section. So now I just want to introduce today's guest, very exciting speaker. We have with us today Dani Shapiro. She's the author of the New York Times best-selling memoir, Inheritance. It was published in January 2019. Her other books include the memoirs Hourglass, Still Writing, Devotion, and Slow Motion, and 5 novels, including Black and White and Family History. Along with teaching writing workshops around the world, Dani has taught at Columbia and New York University and is the co-founder of a writers' conference in Italy. In February of 2019, Dani launched the original podcast, Family Secrets, in collaboration with iHeartMedia. An iTunes Top 10 podcast, the series features stories from guests who, like Dani, have uncovered life-altering and long-hidden secrets from their family's past. She currently lives with her family in Connecticut, and it is my pleasure to introduce her. Let me just put her book away. Hello, Dani.
Hi, Esther. Nice to be with you all.
Thank
People
you so
from
much.
all over the world.
Yeah, it really is quite an international crowd. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
We're so glad to have you and to hear your story. And I'm a huge fan of your book. I have my copy here myself, actually.
That's great. You have the UK edition. I love seeing that.
I thought it looked a little bit different than the version that I put up here on the screen. So welcome. We know that you have a very, very exciting, interesting story, mystery. That's the whole premise of your novel. And I wanted to know if you could start off by giving everyone a little bit of background into your story.
Yeah, of course. I also just want to say, I just wrote down when you said this deep nostalgia tool, that just sounds completely amazing and mysterious and magical. So in the spring of 2016, my husband was sending away for a DNA test just for his own curiosity, because he wanted to be able to talk with his elderly dad about family history. And he asked me if I wanted to send away for one as well. And I really could so easily have said no. I felt that I knew everything that there was to know about my family history. Both of my parents, who were both deceased, were Eastern European Ashkenazi Jews. So I assumed I was pretty much close to 100% Eastern European Ashkenazi. But I went ahead and did it just kind of on a lark, just recreational DNA testing. And when my results came back, they spelled a very, very different story than the one that I had always known. My results showed me to be 50% Eastern European Ashkenazi, and the rest was this smattering of Western Europe, Germany, France, England, Ireland, Sweden. And that was the beginning of a huge mystery that I spent a couple of years just unfolding and learning everything that I possibly could. But the shocking thing that sent me on that mystery journey was realizing that my dad, who raised me, had not been my biological father, which is something that I had never known, never entertained or suspected.
Wow. So when you made that discovery, or at the very, very beginning, what were the feelings that went through you? Was there, or did you know what you were looking at the very beginning, or did you still not believe it?
I didn't know what I was looking at. I went through something probably like the 5 stages of grief. I was in denial. I thought that the company maybe made a mistake and switched my spit test with somebody else's, which really doesn't happen, but that's my, it was so impossible. And what happened is that my husband, who's much more technologically adept than I am, he knew about GEDmatch, which is a site where people can compare their DNA kit number with another DNA kit number and see what the closest common ancestor is. I didn't have any of this terminology at the time. I didn't know any of this at all. But I had a much older half sister from an early marriage of my father's, and I had recalled that she had done she had done a DNA test a number of years before. She had mentioned it to me, so I reached out to her, and she sent me her DNA kit number, and my husband uploaded both into GEDmatch, and it showed that we were not related. So if my half sister and I are not related, then it means that our shared father is not the father of one of us. And what I really instantly leapt to and knew was that my dad had not been, it was me. My dad was not my biological father. It was so, it's one of those things where it was always hiding in plain sight, but I never saw it. I mean, no one did. But I didn't look anything like that part of my family. I mean, people looking at me right now would probably say, really? You thought you were 100% Eastern European Ashkenazi? I look much more like I came from Western Europe. I fielded comments all my life about how I didn't look like my family. And initially there was no one to ask because both of my parents were gone. My father had died in a car accident when I was 23. And I just want to reiterate, I mean, I adored him. I still do. I still consider him my dad. He raised me and he loved me, and I loved him. But he was not my biological father, and that was shocking. So there were two mysteries that I was faced with initially, which were, if my father wasn't my biological father, who is? And the other was, what did my parents know about this? And how can I learn as much as I possibly can, given the fact that they're gone?
And did you think that the story would just end there? I mean, you couldn't have imagined it would have gone as far as it did. I imagine for a lot of people, they live with that mystery. As soon as they know that their father is not their biological father, they don't necessarily get the answers so soon.
Well, I think one of the things that was really remarkable about my story and what happened with me is that I had a couple of clues. Very quickly, there were clues. And one clue was that a first cousin appeared on my page, and it was not someone I knew. So
very close. That's such a close match.
Very, very close match, and it was, it was a male first cousin, and he was identified only by his initials. But we were able to, because as many people who are listening to us know, often someone administers your account for you. Like a husband might administer it for a wife, or a child might administer it for a parent. And in this case, there was a name associated with this mystery first cousin. And so that was one clue. It wouldn't have been enough. But there was another clue, which was a long ago conversation that I had had with my mother that I remembered everything about once I found myself faced with this. I remembered everything about it, and it had happened decades earlier. And I had introduced her to someone at an event at a graduate school I was attending. And my mother said, "Oh, it's very nice to meet you. Where are you from?" It was a classmate of mine. And my classmate said, "I'm from Philadelphia." And my mother said, "Oh, my daughter was conceived in Philadelphia." She said that, which was the strangest thing in the world to say. I mean, to a perfect stranger, and I had never heard that. And usually we don't know how our parents or where our parents conceived us. We don't really want to know. And I said, "Mom, what do you mean? What are you talking about?" And she said, "Oh, you don't want to know. It's not a pretty story." And I remembered everything about this. That evening, I was driving her home back to New York City where she lived. And I said, "You can't just tell me that the story of my conception was not a pretty story. That is not an okay place to leave this conversation." And she proceeded to tell me that she and my father had had trouble conceiving, This was in the early 1960s, and that they had gone to an institute. That was the word she used. She didn't say clinic, she didn't say hospital, she didn't say doctor, she said institute. And that there was a famous doctor, as she put it, at the institute who would perform artificial insemination, that my father, as she put it, had slow sperm, and he would perform artificial insemination with my father's sperm, and that's how I was conceived. So this was a strange thing to find out, but something that I had known for years was that that's how I was conceived. But now, faced with this new information and realizing that my dad had not been my biological father, I instantly was able to put that piece together. And I realized that my parents must have used a sperm donor. And so that meant that there was a sperm donor at an institute in Philadelphia in the early 1960s. So click on Google, discover that there had been indeed an institute, and it was on the campus of University of Pennsylvania. And then just the educated guess that probably that meant that the donor would have been a medical student, probably. I don't know how my husband and I both kind of had that thought, but we did. And so going back to the first cousin, we were able to identify that first cousin using nothing more than Facebook, Google, and there was an obituary associated with this first cousin's mother. I should just back up because it's a lot to take in, but the way it went was, if you are, you this stranger who I'm looking at on Facebook, if you are my first cousin, then it means that an uncle of yours would be my biological father. I mean, that's the only, if this, then that. And so there was this obituary of his mother who passed away a few years earlier, and she was survived by a couple of brothers.
One of them would be your father.
One of them probably would be my father. One of them was a doctor. Clicked on him. And where had he gone to medical school? University of Pennsylvania.
Wow.
And when had he been there? At the time of my conception. So this process took 36 hours. And that's one of the really unusual things about my story, because it was so fast. It was lightning fast from the time that I had the shock that my dad had not been my biological father until I was literally looking at a YouTube video of the man who was my biological father giving a lecture. He's a retired physician who has a specialty in medical ethics, which really, you cannot make this stuff up. So that was unusual, and I'm very grateful for that, because some people are able, many people discover these surprises. Many people discover DNA surprises when they do DNA tests. I think it's about 2%. You would know better than I do, but it's around 2% of the people who submit their DNA, and many of them do hit a dead end. I was able to find him, identify him. And then I was also able to learn a lot about the time that my parents conceived me and the history of reproductive medicine in the United States, and the way in which, when couples used donors, they kept it secret. They were told that they should always keep it secret, and it'd be better for the child to never know and to never tell anyone. So there are many people who are making these discoveries because their parents believed that it was the right thing. This was a secret that they were going to take to the grave with them.
Times are just so different now. It's so interesting to look back, and I found that so startling when I read your book. Just that was the norm, and that nobody would kind of tell their children or tell their communities that they had used donors. It's just fascinating. I think times have just changed so much, and also just the assurance of privacy and of secrecy back then, and And that, a medical student back in the 60s would have been sure that this will never come back to him, and that it's just fascinating.
Exactly. And, one of the things that, one of the things that has happened in these last couple of years, and when my book came out, it kind of exploded. And I started traveling all over the country, and I was supposed to travel all over the world. If not for the pandemic, I would have been all over the place. But I did go to about 40 cities in the US, and a few different things happened. One was that I would be in front of an audience and I would realize that it wasn't my usual readers. Inheritance is my 10th book. And this was suddenly a whole different world there were elderly men coming to my readings. And I would think to myself, I wonder why you're here. And then I started to realize, oh, a lot of these elderly men are people who donated sperm and are trying to understand what that means now that they can be identified. And then couples, would come and they would look kind of stricken and they'd be holding hands. And I thought, well, who are you? And then I realized this because eventually people started really coming up to me and writing to me. And it was often people who had children made families using donor sperm and eventually donor eggs, and had never told, and were now realizing that their children were likely going to find out, and what should they do? And they would read my book and they would see what it was like to make this discovery after my parents were gone. And then they would think, well, maybe what we need to do is have a reckoning, tell the truth to our children, even though that's going to be really hard. And then finally, all of these people who were making the discoveries themselves, who were, sort of reeling from the shock of it all. But also, I spoke at a bunch of bioethics programs at Harvard and at Stanford and at Johns Hopkins here in the US, because it's a huge ethical conundrum. So a young medical student who donated sperm in the 1960s or the 1970s or the 1980s even, or earlier too, was guaranteed anonymity. Even today, there are people who are donating who believe that they can remain anonymous, but that's another story. Mm-hmm. Back then, it really had to do with the idea that there could ever be tests like MyHeritage or, other companies, and that there would be this thing called the internet, and that, people would be, completely identifiable as a result of submitting their DNA. That would have been pure science fiction. And then these medical advances happened, and then these unintended consequences of these medical advances and scientific advances happened. So what does that mean for the people who wished to be anonymous? And what does it mean for the people who were born, who never agreed to this, and who had been really living under false assumptions about their biological identity for most of our lives, giving incorrect medical history, for example?
It's such an interesting question. And what are our responsibilities to these biological family members who we may be related to, but maybe up until now have had nothing to do with? And it could be much later in life also for a lot of people, not necessarily when they're young. It's a very interesting ethical question. And my question for you is, first of all, how did you decide what to do next? Because I know even that is a question for a lot of people. Once they know the answer, do they want to meet? Do they want to reach out? Or do they want to just say, okay, I know now, and that's enough for me? So how did you decide?
It didn't really feel like a decision. It felt more like an imperative for me. And I've talked to a lot of people. I haven't encountered anyone who has discovered a biological parent who didn't want to at least know something, even if that something was merely medical history, like at sort of the baseline level.
Right.
I think I very quickly intuited that this would be a shocking thing for a 78-year-old retired physician to learn. And I put myself as much as I could in his shoes, and I wrote him an email, and I couched it in, I'm sure this is going to come as a shock. I am shocked. I had no idea that my father hadn't been my biological father. My findings, my research is, telling me that I think you may be my biological father. I don't want anything from you. I will respect your privacy. This is who I am. Here's my website. You can check me out. I'm a fairly public person. I'm trying to confirm this. I feel so lost and confused, and so it was really like appealing to him on a very human level. And I don't know how I knew this, but one of the things that I've since really learned, having heard so many stories, is that when we are confronted, but one of the things we think we're pretty sure of is who we're related to. It's just one of the things that we think we can sort of check that box. We're pretty sure that our past is, as we remember it, is accurate. We don't know the future, but we think we know the past. And for someone to appear in an email inbox or in a letter or whatever, saying, I am your biological child, or I am your biological sister, or I am your biological cousin, or whatever the case may be, it actually upends our sense of our identity, because we think we know. So my biological father, for example, been married for 50 years. He has 3 kids. They all live close by. It's a close-knit family. So the feeling of that is like that someone is an interloper. Someone is coming and is an outsider. It's really kind of biblical, and it's very primitive and primal, the feeling. I've heard so many stories, and this is just about always the case. From the people being approached, the feeling is, what do you want? Like, stay away from me. What do you want? It's feeling threatened. It's very often feeling financially threatened, even if there's no reason at all in realistic terms to feel that way. It's just a feeling of like, don't upend my life. And and I think when I wrote to him, in every correspondence that I had with him, I was trying to let him know I have no intention of upending your life. An interesting thing with me is that, when he would click on my website and take a look, as I'm sure he did the minute he got my email, he would have seen that I look just like him.
Do you? Do you look just like?
I look just like him. And B, he would have seen that that I have a fairly public profile, and that I'm a writer who's written a great deal about family and identity. And there was a picture even at that time on the homepage of my website with Oprah with her arm around me. And this would not have been good news. For him, this would have been like, on the one hand, oh, that's kind of interesting. And on the other hand, oh no, I'm like, what am I? And so I also just want to say, like, when I realized that I was going to write about this, because of course I was going to write about this, because writing is how I come to understand everything about my life. It's the way I've always come to understand everything about my life. And this was literally the story of my existence. I made it very, very clear to him from the beginning that I would protect his identity. that I would not just change his name, but change details so that he would not be recognizable, so that someone reading it, someone even who knew him reading it, wouldn't know that it was he. It was very important to me that he feel comfortable. And that was like, that became the deal between us in a way. And really what it had to do with is kindness. We both treated each other ultimately. I mean, there was a lot of back and forth between us. And he initially was threatened, initially like, stay away from me, but he actually came around on his own. And I think the feeling of, this is complicated. These are questions that we were never meant to like walk through in life. So how do we do this in a way that's compassionate? How do we do this in a way that is heartfelt? How do we do this in a way where we're treating each other like human beings in a complicated situation instead of like adversaries?
Wow. I want to go back to when you said that that you look just like him. What did that feel like? That must have been quite a shock when you first saw him to see that you're so similar, and that you get so much of who you are is actually from him. That must have been must have brought up so many emotions.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because there's so many layers to it, right? Like, so the first time that I saw him was on a YouTube video, and he was giving a lecture. And I was in a state of shock, and I didn't actually initially register how much I look like him, because he was an elderly man and I was not. And, so I wasn't registering that. But what I did register was that he was standing behind a lectern, giving a lecture, and he was gesturing with his hands as he was speaking. And he was sort of cupping the air as he spoke, like I'm doing now. That is how I speak.
Wow.
And it was also, I give a lot of lectures. I stand behind a lectern. So it was familiar to me. And I saw the gesture, and I saw the profound familiarity of that gesture. And then he started running a Q&A, and even my husband was sitting next to me as we were staring at this YouTube video. And my husband even like turned to me and he said, "My God, he even runs a Q&A like you." But there was this intense familiarity. And it's something when we're raised in a biological family, we take that for granted. We don't ever think about it. And if it's absent, like for example, in the case of adoptees who know that they're adopted, there's a sense that, well, we know why that's absent. It was absent for me, and I didn't know why. And then suddenly there I was seeing the familiar, really seeing it. And when finally I met him, very much this feeling of tremendous familiarity. And so it's like, I never dreamt that this was going to be my life or my life's work or something that was so profoundly important to me. But one of the things I've thought about so much in these recent years, in these 4 years, I guess, since the discovery, is about nature and nurture, and the contributions to who we are, of who raises us, and that environment, and that that world, but also the biology, also the genetics of it. I mean, one of the things that I've contended with a lot when I've spoken is that initially sometimes people, particularly adoptive parents, will kind of get mad at me. Usually they haven't read the book yet when they get mad at me, but they'll say, like, "What are you saying? Are you saying that nature is all that matters?" And it's like, of course I'm not saying that nature is all that matters. I'm just saying that it matters. And to dismiss it as it's often dismissed, like as it was often dismissed especially in my parents' day, of like, oh, it's, or parents who don't disclose to their children because, oh, it's just a little bit of tissue. What difference does it make? It's no different from donating blood or donating a retina or donating a kidney. Well, actually, it is different. And that sense of our, our essence being made of both of both nature and nurture, I feel intensely and all the time, because I really do come from three people: my mother, who's my biological mother, my father who raised me, and the man who's my biological father.
I always find it so fascinating. You know, we have a lot of reunion stories here at MyHeritage of people that have taken MyHeritage DNA kits and have found biological family members, sometimes halfway around the world. They don't even speak the same language. And just in every story, I find that those who find family members there, they always at the first meeting they can't get over those resemblances and just the similarities between them. And you know, even if they were brought up in different corners of the world and with different parents and different surroundings, it's amazing to see.
Yeah, I mean, my biological father and I have the same favorite novel. Why? And it's not like it's kind of an obscure novel, you know, it's not, or we have similar senses of humor. We have, our hands are very similar. And he has three children, and his daughter, his oldest child, and I have become close. And his other two children are boys, and she always kind of grew up wanting a sister, and then she got one. And we have a lot in common, and we also, you know, when we first met, I remember my husband just looking at me and saying, "She's your sister, baby." Like that, there it is. There's, you know, and I mean both in terms of physical attributes and something ineffable, something that is beyond, you know, the shape of a face or, you know, physical attributes.
That's incredible. And I want to ask, in terms of you know, actually meeting them, and how did his family, how did everyone take it besides for him, the whole surrounding family? It just seems kind of like a fairy tale. Like we also see a lot of cases where the families don't want to meet or don't want contact, and as you said, you know, they really do feel pushed or threatened, but they stop contact there or cut it off. So did you ever think that would happen?
Yeah, this definitely was not a fairy tale. I mean, initially, um, he was very reserved and very nervous. His wife of 50 years, he had never told that he had been a sperm donor, not because he was hiding it, but because it was not significant to him. It was something that he did as a very young person, in the way that we often don't think that the things we do as very young people are significant if we, you know, as we move through life. And I just don't think he ever thought about it. So that was a shock for her. He told his grown children that this had happened. I think one of the things that they were particularly worried about, and there are many of these stories here in the US, especially because there's no regulation and there never has been, where someone discovers that, you know, I mean, someone was a sperm donor and maybe one biological child appears, and then that one biological child is at the beginning of a long line of biological children, and there might be 20 or 40 or 100. I mean, that happens, and that can really upend a life. What do you do? What is that? I mean, in the case of us, I appear to be the only one, but there could have been 47 more people behind me. So I think there was that fear. He was very kind and responsible, as far as I'm concerned, initially, by giving me medical history. I didn't even have to ask for it. You know, he's a doctor. He understood what it meant that I had been giving false, incorrect medical history for my entire life. And but then I said I wanted to meet, and he cut off contact, kind of slammed the door, and that was heartbreaking for me. But I also felt like, well, if that's the way it's going to be, I've gotten a lot more than a lot of people get, and I know where I come from, and that's huge. And I sort of made my peace with it, and then I heard from him. He had thought about it, and he had second thoughts, and it felt important to him too. The idea that he had a biological child out there made him want to know that biological child. And so, but all of these things are very complicated, and they're complicated for multiple people. It's not just, the two people for whom this is happening. It's, it was his wife, it was his children. It was my family, my father's, my father's family, who were going to find out that we were not biologically related. There's just so many pieces of this. So there are stories. I mean, I think there are a lot of things that really are miraculous about my story, but it was hard, and it was painful, and it was kind of world rocking, and it continued to, and still is sometimes. It still feels like, when you make a discovery like that in midlife, as I did, there's a lot of years before that of believing, things are a certain way, and then discovering that they're actually so different, at the essence of what makes a person a person. I still, at 4 years later, sometimes have a moment of thinking, God, that's really true. That really happened. This is what's happened. And, mostly now I feel like, what a wild, amazing, liberating, beautiful ride. But, it's definitely a ride, definitely a roller coaster ride.
Wow, it really does sound like it. And those 2 years as you were making all these discoveries must have been very, very emotional, back and forth, both ways. What advice do you have to those that are on their journey now, searching for biological family? Some people already know what the mystery of their family is. Others maybe don't. But what advice do you have for them? Obviously, every case is different, and different details, and different people, different decisions. But in terms of the whole process and the psychology behind it, what would you say to them?
Well, a few things. I mean, one is that you're not alone. There's so many people making these discoveries. Hundreds of thousands of people are making these discoveries. And, and now there are, even just in the 4 years since I made mine, there are more tools. There are therapists who are starting to specialize in this. That didn't exist even 4 years ago. And now there are resources. There are private Facebook groups for NPEs, stands for, not parent expected, or non-parental event, or now the other term is MPE. And I'm trying to remember what that is. I don't remember. It keeps on shifting and changing. But the idea of that there are many, many other people who are contending with these searches and these discoveries, and you don't have to do this by yourselves. And also, because of the popularity of these DNA tests, more and more gets revealed. Like, something that's a dead end is not necessarily going to stay a dead end. And someone can, decide that they don't want to have anything to do with you, and then they may have a change of heart. And you never really know how it's going to play out. I had an experience where I was giving a talk, a very large talk in Sun Valley, Idaho, thousands of people. And it was the kind of thing that people would come to and not even know what the talk was going to be about. And after my talk, in which I actually mentioned the name of the institute where I'd been conceived, this man well into his 80s stopped me afterwards, and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, I was a donor at that institute. And he and I met later in that afternoon for a drink. And he was so shaken up by the idea that here was this human being, me, who could have been conceived by him, right? I wasn't, but could have been. And that made him think there are very likely real flesh and blood people out there in the world who are my biological offspring. And what he decided to do after thinking about that was he said, I'm going to go do my DNA, have my DNA tested, and spread it everywhere so that if I have biological offspring out there and they want to find me, they can.
Wow.
And I loved that story so much. And I think, things like that are happening. So, something, that's why I say something that might seem like a dead end may not be a dead end, as this tapestry continues to grow and grow.
That's great advice. I see we have a lot of questions from the audience. Should we dig in and take a few of them?
Sure.
Okay. So the first one is from Corey, and Corey asks, Dani, do you ever wish you had not made this discovery?
That's a great question, Corey. And I have never had a single moment since I made the discovery, even though there were a lot of painful moments. I've never wished that I hadn't made it. It made me visible to myself in a way that I realized something had been missing. There were, a lot of people who discover that they're donor conceived or late discovery adoptees or things like that share the experience in childhood of feeling like there's something about me that doesn't make sense. There's something about me that doesn't fit in. Why do I feel this way? Why do I feel like an outsider? I've heard so many people describe that sensation, that feeling, and I certainly felt that way as a child. And I never understood why. And I always kind of thought that there must be something the matter with me that I felt that way. And this discovery made all of that so clear to me. And so what it's felt like is enormously liberating. I feel like this knowledge and everything that I've learned from it has become like a superpower that I never would have had if I had spent my life kind of with, really, I mean, in my book, I write, I always knew there was a secret. What I didn't know was that the secret was me, and there's something about being a secret that means that you will always be a little bit obscured from yourself. And it's a great blessing to not feel that way anymore.
Incredible. And I love hearing that you don't regret it for a minute. That's amazing to hear. We have a question here from Dave. He says, how did your own family receive the news?
Thanks, Dave. I have a pretty, in terms of my family, my family is my husband and my son. So I'll start with that. So my husband was just kind of my partnering, my compatriot in figuring all this out. He was incredibly wonderful and supportive and involved. Interesting, my son, who was 17 at the time, he's now 21, he's the only other person in the world for whom this actually has a genetic impact. I had been giving incorrect medical history for him his whole life too.
Wow.
And it meant that he had a living biological grandfather. He really took it in stride. It didn't feel like a loss for him because he never knew my dad. My dad died before he was born. And so he didn't have a relationship with my dad. So it didn't feel like a loss. My dad was just an ancestor to him. When it came to my larger family, my father's family, my mother's family, my father's family, he had a younger sister who I'm very close to, and I write about a lot in my book, my Aunt Shirley, and she was well into her 90s when I made this discovery. She's still with us. And I flew to Chicago, where she lives, to tell her and to talk to her. And it was one of the most profound and remarkable experiences of my life, because I was afraid that I knew she'd be kind because she's a kind person, but I was afraid that I would sense something from her, that this mattered to her in some way. She's an Orthodox Jew. She's a great grandmother of something like 70 great grandchildren. Blood matters. I thought it might matter, and I was afraid that that would be heartbreaking for both of us. And instead, I think she loves me more. And I could almost cry saying that, but there was something so profoundly healing about that conversation, where she said to me at one point, she said, "Knowing what you know now, you're more of a daughter to my brother. You're an agent." She actually speaks this way. She said, "You're an agent that helps him express the finest kind of love." And that was the beginning of healing for me. Came from a 93-year-old woman to whom I was saying, it turns out that we are not biologically relatives. Couldn't have mattered less.
Wow, I found that one of the most touching parts of the book, the whole conversation with your aunt. I thought that was just lovely. How you described that in the book, it was incredible. And I see a lot of questions coming in, but I think we'll just take one last question. And just some really nice comments about discoveries that some of our users are making as well. It's just so nice to see. As here we have Aaron wrote, "I always say nothing has changed, yet everything has changed." So true.
That is almost word for word something that I wrote in Inheritance. Exactly. I mean, nothing has changed and everything has changed. It's the experiences of sort of looking at yourself, in the mirror, and you're still the same face is staring back at you. You're the same person that you were, but this new information also changes. It also changes everything, but it doesn't change anything in its, I remember saying to my best friend at the time, like right after the discovery, are you looking at me differently? Are you like, do you feel like I'm a different person? And she just looked at me with so much compassion, and she said, "No, because you're not a different person. You're the same person you've always been. There's new information about that person."
Wow. So just the last question, and then we'll go on to giving away our DNA kit, our MyHeritage DNA kit, to one lucky winner. So this question is from Jennifer, and it's a good summary question as well. She asks, "Do you think the missing piece feeling contributed to the work and to the writing you were doing before you found out?"
It's a great question, Jennifer. Thank you. Absolutely. I mean, in a way, I almost think that it's what made me a writer. I was always digging. And if you look back at my books from the very beginning, I was always, whether it was fiction or memoir, I was always writing about family secrets. I was always writing about the corrosive power of secrets and what secrets do to us or don't do to us. And, it was a theme of mine, and I never really knew why. I didn't really think about why. It just was. But now, when I actually go back and I look at my earlier books, it's like there's a trail of breadcrumbs that leads all the way ultimately to this discovery and this book. It was always there. I was digging and digging and digging until my shovel hit the treasure.
Wow, it's really incredible, and just I know that I loved reading about your journey, and I can't wait till the next installment. And I'm really looking forward hearing more. For anyone who missed part of today's session with Dani Shapiro, you can rewatch it on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/MyHeritage. Under the video section, you can watch today's Facebook Live as well as all of our past Facebook Lives. Dani, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I see that so many people in our audience were just so touched by this emotional story, and just hearing it straight from you is just incredible. And as Michelle wrote here, it gives me goosebumps for you and also for those of us that have also experienced this.
It's just like such a pleasure to be with you all, and this particular conversation was really meaningful to me. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And here at MyHeritage, we have the blessing of really hearing these stories so often that sometimes you think that they're you just hear them all the time from our users, of people that are finding family members. But going in depth and hearing all the details and the feelings and the emotions behind the story is very inspiring. So, I see we've lost Dani. I don't know. Maybe she clicked and and she seems to have left the chat. But that was such a great session with Dani Shapiro. For anyone who hasn't read her book, I'm going to put it up here on the screen, the New York Times bestseller, Inheritance by Dani Shapiro, where she goes into more detail about her journey finding her biological father. So I suggest that you all check it out. And now we will give our winner of today's DNA kit on MyHeritage. So today's winner is Gail Smiley Shirley. And Gail wrote to us and she said, "When I found my biological grandfather's picture, I almost fell over because he looked exactly like my dad. The photo of my grandfather was taken about the same age as my dad was at that time. It really takes the wind out of you." So congratulations, Gail, and we'll be in touch with you through private message to claim your prize. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today in a really inspiring and touching session. And we hope to see you all at our next Facebook Live. You can visit our blog, blog.myheritage.com, and we have a recent post that lists all of our upcoming online sessions. So we hope to see you all there, as we are joined by experts in the field of DNA and genealogy to give us talks and help us on our journeys. So thank you all, and we hope that you have a great day.